Yep. So let's start. So good to have you, Amol. I'll just quickly just also give you the background that how these sessions are conducted on Wednesdays is that I read through the articles and I take pauses and generally I chime in with my personal opinions, interpretation, some anecdote that I have. And at any point, if somebody has any questions, thoughts, ruminations, feel free to interrupt me, have a dialogue going, and don't worry about too much sticking to the paradigm of this article. We usually cover it within 1 hour. One article piece has been able to cover, except for maybe one or two. So even if you're going a bit tangential, it's completely okay as long as it's pertaining to Bitcoin. So, yep, with that, let's start. So the title is Bitcoin is Common Sense. Parker Lewis, this is one of the last pieces, and it was written in
At any point, if
2020,
somebody has any questions,
I believe was the this one when the pandemic has started to set in as a global phenomenon. And don't worry about which I think will become more and more relevant as we usually cover it within 1 hour. One article. Perhaps the sentiments contained in the following pages are not yet sufficiently fashionable to procure them general favor. A long habit of not thinking a thing wrong gives it a superficial appearance of being right and raises at first a formidable outcry in defense of custom. But the tumult soon subsides. Time makes more converts than reason. This is by Thomas Paine from Common Sense, who was one of the pioneers of American independence. And read this paragraph, and then I'll share what I have to share. These were the opening remarks of Thomas Paine's call for American independence in early 1776. At the time, a declaration of independence was far from a certainty. But in Paine's view, there was no question. It wasn't a debate. There was only one path forward. Still, he understood that public opinion had not yet caught up and naturally remained anchored to the status quo, with a preference for reconciliation rather than independence. Old habits die hard. The status quo has a tendency of being defended, regardless of merit, merely by its anchoring in time to the way things have always been. However, truths have a way of becoming self evident in time, more often due to common sense rather than any amount of reason or logic. One day, the truth is more likely to smack you in the face, becoming painfully obvious through some first hand experience, which opens up a perspective that otherwise would not have existed. While Paine was undoubtedly attempting to persuade an undecided populace with reason and logic, it was at the same time an appeal to not overthink that which stands in opposition to what is already self evident. So, I hope you guys were able to follow up because I believe this is a really fascinating passage in understanding Bitcoin itself. So we've not come yet to Bitcoin. These are ideas which are far more fundamental, I believe. Bitcoin is a technology which is still relatively new, but on a very human level, all of us understand independence. All of us understand common sense to varying degrees. That's open to debate of how much common sense is common, but most people have a sense of what is right and wrong in their own frameworks. So, just to summarize it in my own interpretation, I think truth for me, how I have come to put a framework around it, is causation. Is that A happens only then B happens, or there is a direct relationship between two events because of something, and that is the truth in a very cold approach to reality. And Bitcoin and economic incentives are the coldest reality because that's how incentives work. When somebody produces value, they can keep on producing more of it, and in exchange they receive something that is more valuable to them because that is the reason that they will voluntarily engage in that exchange. So it is something that economic reality will teach you either through your own prospective calculation, if you are somebody who is receptive to that, who puts importance to understanding how economics works. If you don't, then reality teaches you because somebody else will put in the time and the effort and will gain more value. And over time, value itself is something that stays with time or increases with time and speaks for itself. So I think in a more broader context, this was by Thomas Paine for American independence, which is a far bigger perspective or phenomena than monetary history. But monetary history was one of the pillars of any independence or political. Just one. I'll take a pause if somebody has anything to share. Continue.
Yeah, I just have one point. Like, even the last session, Parker Lewis's last session that you conducted, he has a very American point of view of looking at things, which is of course a function of where someone is raised and where someone is brought up. But yeah, I mean the way he's drawing parallels with American independence. So in the last session, he was probably trying to talk to specific ways in which America came to be. Yeah, so he has a very American point of view on Bitcoin.
Right. I remember I also just by my own choice substituted Americans for individuals in that, because I believe it's a very limiting thing to put a nationality to ideas of independence and freedom. It's very human to want freedom. It's a very natural thing. All of us understand it, even if some people might articulate it better. So yeah, I believe it's a more individual thing than an American thing. But for how history has panned out, there is a stronger lobby and group of people in America which advocate for ideas of freedom than most places in the world.
Yeah, true.
Yep. We'll continue reading, but yeah, as always, if anybody has any thoughts, please always feel free to share them. In Payne's view, independence was not a modern day IQ test, nor was its relevance confined to the American colonies. Instead, it was a common sense test, and its interest was universal to the cause of all mankind, as Payne put it. In many ways, the same is true of Bitcoin. It is not an IQ test. Instead, Bitcoin is common sense, and its implications are near universal. Few people have ever stopped to question or understand the function of money. It facilitates practically every transaction anyone has ever made. Yet no one really knows the why of that equation, nor the properties that allow money to effectively coordinate economic activity. I'll read this sentence again. I think most of most of you guys here, I'm sure, are not new to economics and Bitcoin and money. But yeah, just reiterating on how it's both theoretical and very practical for us to realize the function of money, because most people are unconsciously using and also understanding the function of money, but not aware of it in a very weird way. They're conscious because they're acting on the incentives that money allows them to do the things that they gain out of those actions, but they're not thinking through how money is the thing that is allowing them to do in a very counterintuitive way. Maybe I'm not able to frame it perfectly. I'll read this again. It facilitates practically every transaction anyone has ever made, yet no one really knows the why of that equation, nor the properties that allow money to effectively coordinate economic activity. Yeah. I think how Austin economics defines economics as a subject, and this is just from the reading that we have done in the one of the previous Wednesday Reading Club sessions about how to think about the economy, which is a primer on the Austrian School of Economics, but the Austrian School of Economics, of course, calls itself the School of Economics. So it defines economics as a study of maximizing human value. And as students of economics, anybody who's interested in that subject is interested in seeing how value can be maximized. Value itself is subjective, very interestingly. So there is no one metric that somebody can say that, hey, we have arrived at maximum value. It is for each individual to decide and articulate for themselves, and if they're interested in the market process through interactions with other people, what value is to them. But when we understand economic activity, we mean that we are trying to maximize human value, and human value is created by human action, and it is money that allows us to coordinate that. So most people understand value, they don't think through what value exactly is for them, but this is how money is like that water in the sea where we are fishes and we don't realize that it's essential to our society's foundation. Its function is taken for granted, and as a result, it is a subject not widely taught or explored. Yet, despite its limited baseline of knowledge, there is often a visceral reaction to the very idea of Bitcoin as money. The default position is predictably no. Bitcoin is an anathema to all notions of existing custom, On the surface, it is entirely inconsistent with what folks know money to be. For most, money is just money because it always has been. In general, for any individual, the construction of money is anchored in time and it is very naturally not questioned. I think one quote from quote, but it was by Mises that it is completely, this is my version of it, it is completely reasonable for somebody to be ignorant of economics or the subject of money, markets, credit, uh, but it is not okay for somebody to have a loud and vociferous opinion about that because that's being proud of your own ignorance. So I think even for me, when I started into Bitcoin, it was a very technology oriented thing. I was very fascinated by the idea of how computer networks can arrive at one piece of information which is accurate uh, and the same for all computers at the same time. It was a very juvenile or a fascinating subject to me, but I never looked at it as credible monetary properties, how it has implications for society. So I think um, the point that I'm trying to highlight, I think, is that for most people, Bitcoin, even though they have not put in the time or being receptive to what the problem is trying to solve, they tend to have some bias towards it for their own reasons, which is different for different people. And there are some frameworks around what people's reactions are. There are statists, there are people who are shit into shitcoins and believe that all of it is for their own reasons, not trying to solve the problem that Bitcoin was originally designed to solve. So yeah, this is a completely different conversation, but I think I was trying to highlight that um, let me just take one pause. Yeah, that I've tended to notice that a lot of people have a very visceral reaction, as this article puts it, to the idea of Bitcoin, which was ridiculous to me from the start because to me Bitcoin was always language. It was computer code. So anybody having a visceral reaction to just information or language is beyond my understanding. Yeah, I'll take again a quick pause, then we'll start in about 30 seconds. Yeah, curious if somebody has also in their own experience noticed. So I'll just share one experience. My sister and there's another family friend who I consider a very close person who's also like a sister. So I've been discussing with them of the problem of central banking and how there is no group of people in India historically also who have resisted central banking to the best of my knowledge. And to them, it's too radical to even entertain. And I've understood that maybe it's not even the right approach with them. Maybe I should just discuss very basic economic concepts. But yeah, I've noticed that a lot of people have very strong reaction to questioning institutions which are just human based. I don't know why it's so emotional for a lot of people.
I think whatever people invest their time and energy in, they become associated with it. It becomes part of their identity, and it becomes very difficult to tear that part of their identity away from them, right? Because like tearing that part of identity is like tearing a part of a body, uh, and so people don't want to do that usually.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, yeah, I think also it's just the ease of information that somebody like me, I remember I had my first smartphone when I just got out of school. And I'm sure it's like most teenagers now have a smartphone even when they're in middle school. So for me, access to the internet and to the information explosion was when I was 18. And I started not at the time, of course, using it as a tool for education, but at least as a tool for getting exposed to more information than most people in my family. So for me, it was perhaps easy to be receptive to new information. So when I was made receptive to Bitcoin, I was at least open-minded enough to entertain the idea without an emotional bias. But for a lot of people, that might be not easy for them to uh, dissociate their emotions from a lot of the ideas of economics.
There's this framework of personality. It's called MBTI framework, and like if you will ask a lot of Bitcoiners to like evaluate themselves as to what kind of personality they have, you will find that they almost like most of them will come to one or two kinds of personality types, right? So uh, and there's a running joke that we had in bit space, right, about a lot of bitcoiners being autistic or aspergy, right, which is they have less emotional abilities and higher than average logical abilities. You can sense that. So that is why like certain people are just predisposed or maybe more easily, they can more easily understand and appreciate bitcoin because that's who they are in certain ways too.
Hmm. Makes sense. Yeah, I think for me, one trait that I've read about and observed is disagreeableness. I think that's the spirit of sovereignty, or even the spirit of don't trust, verify. That most Bitcoiners are disagreeable people. You will have to really convince them through logic and through debate of what you think is right, which is the nature of free market, right? That ideas over time interact with each other, and the best ideas emerge as successful, and the reality of the market. So I think free market is very natural to a lot of Bitcoiners who fall down that rabbit hole and adopt those principles. Yeah, I'll read this one line. In general, for any individual, the construction of money is anchored in time and it is very naturally not questioned. But enter Bitcoin and everyone suddenly becomes an expert in what is and isn't money. And to the fly-by-night expert, it certainly is not Bitcoin. Bitcoin is natively digital. It is not tied to a government or central bank. It is volatile and perceived to be slow. It is not used en masse to facilitate commerce, and it is not inflationary. This is one of those rare instances when a thing does not walk like a duck or quack like a duck, but it's actually a duck, and what you thought was a duck all along was mistakenly something entirely different. When it comes to modern money, the long habit of not thinking a thing wrong gives it a superficial appearance of being right. Yeah. And just in the defense of people who do not question it, I mean, I did not question it for the longest time myself, so I'm nobody to say that people are doing something wrong by not questioning, but um, uh, money currently in the system does serve as a medium of exchange, which is like also the technical or theoretical definition of money, that it's the most commonly accepted medium of exchange. And the money that fiat currency has properties of does serve as a medium of exchange. So it's there's a reason that most people are taking it for granted, because for their daily lives and their perceived value, it's not serving them any inconvenience or any problem. But yeah, it does not take much, in my opinion, now to understand what's going on once you start to question the store of value function of money. And that is different for different people. They start off with their own experiences, but over time, I think if somebody is curious, they should not find it too hard to understand the store of value function being broken in the current money. In all perceived to be successful applications today, money is issued by a central bank. It is relatively stable and capable of near infinite transaction throughput. It facilitates day to day commerce, and by the grace of God, its supply can be rapidly inflated to meet the needs of an ever changing economy. Bitcoin has none of these traits, some not presently, others not ever, and as a result, it is most often dismissed as not meeting the standards of modern day money. Yeah, I think this just highlights what I was articulating, that most money in developed economies, even in developing countries like India, is relatively stable. It's capable of near infinite transaction throughput systems with centralized systems. It facilitates day-to-day commerce. And yeah, this is sarcasm, which supply can be rapidly inflated to meet the needs of an ever-changing economy. And Bitcoin has none of these traits, some not presently, which is perhaps infinite transaction throughput. Bitcoin has its challenges in scaling, and others not ever, which is inflation to meet the needs of an ever changing economy, which this article goes on to highlight is such a misnomer that it has been adopted only because of the systemic uh, propaganda of Keynesian economics, that most people intuitively know that printing money does nothing, but it's become the most widely taught school of economics in universities. This is where overthinking a problem can cripple the highest of IQs. Pattern recognition fails because the game fundamentally changed. But the players do not yet realize it. It is akin to getting lost in the weeds or failing to see the forest through the trees. Bitcoin is finitely scarce, it is highly divisible, and it is capable of being sent over a communication channel and on a permissionless basis. There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. Rocket scientists and the most revered investors of our time could look at this equation relative to other applications in the market and be confounded, not seeing its value. While at the same time, if posed with a very simple question, would you rather be paid either in a currency with a fixed supply that cannot be manipulated, or in a currency that is subject to persistent, systemic, and significant debasement? An overwhelming majority of individuals would choose the former all day, every day. I think yeah, this goes on to show that it's just a matter of time, and the article titles just says it perfectly gradually. Then suddenly that the information is out there, and it's about time that overwhelming majority of individuals will wake up to that information and reality. I don't know why I just had this point. I'll just share it with you guys. I think there's also this, at least for me, it was true that a lot of the intellectual community, even in the scientific domain, are not receptive to economics. Economics, maybe this is my bias, for me was a subject that somebody who's smart, who has decently capable brain of questioning things should be able to understand money better than I mean it requires less than it requires to study physics or biology or even mathematics. But I've observed that a lot of people are not actually receptive to economics even when they might be proficient at any of those subjects. So it takes a certain bent of mind, I believe, to question money, which is more yeah, I don't know what the word is, but I think yeah, it's the study of human behavior, which might or might not be receptive to somebody who's studying the universe very objectively from the lens of physics or health. Yeah, two famous quotes. I'm sure you guys have heard this. Warren Buffett on Bitcoin is probably rat poison squared, and Mark Cuban, who recently has become an advocate for Bitcoin. Bitcoin, there's even less you can do with it. I'd rather have bananas. I can eat bananas. Money doesn't grow on trees. I think if you're from India, I'm sure everybody has heard this growing up. Yeah, I don't know if it's true for everywhere, but according to this article, it is. As kids, we all learn that money doesn't grow on trees, but on a societal level, or as a country, any remnant of common sense seem to have left the building. Just in the last 2 months, central banks in the United States, Europe, and Japan, the Fed, ECB, and BOJ, have collectively inflated the supply of their respective currencies by 3.3 trillion in aggregate, an increase of over 20% in just 8 weeks. The Fed alone has accounted for the majority, minting $2.5 trillion and increasing the base money supply by over 60%. And it's far from over. Trillions more will be created. It is not a possibility, it is a certainty. Common sense is that deep feeling of uncertainty many are experiencing that says this doesn't make any sense or this doesn't end well. Few carry that thought process out to its logical conclusion, often because it is uncomfortable to think about, but it is reverberating throughout the country and the world. While not everyone is connecting the equation to 21 million Bitcoin, a growing number of people are. Time makes more converts than reason. Individuals don't have to understand how or why there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. All that has to be recognized in practical experience is that dollars are going to be worth significantly less in the future. And then the idea of having a currency with a fixed supply begins to make sense. Understanding how it is possible that Bitcoin has a fixed supply comes after making that initial connection. But even still, no one needs to understand the how to understand that it is valuable. It is the light bulb turning on. Yeah. The how of 21 million is the engineering implementation, which somebody might not have the inclination to understand. It's a good practice to be able to understand how Bitcoin fundamentally works on mathematics and computer science level. But to understand the value proposition of it is an entirely different thing. You don't have to understand mathematics or computer science to understand Bitcoin's value proposition. And it is the light bulb turning on moment that, not a moment, but it's a journey that everybody experiences in their own time. Michael, you guys seen if people can print money, they will print money. I think this should just be the the tagline of something like any research institute around Bitcoin said. I've been brainstorming Bitcoin policy. The simple thing that I want to just focus on is that central banks have the ability to print money. Bitcoin fixes that. That is the research thesis and the solution. For each individual, there is a choice to either exist in a world in which someone gets to produce new units of money for free, but just not them, or a world where no one gets to do that, including them. From an individual perspective, there is not a marginal difference in those two worlds. It is night and day, and anyone conscious of the decision very intuitively opts for the latter, recognizing that the former is neither sustainable nor to his or her advantage. Imagine there were 100 individuals in an economy, each with different skills. All have determined to use a common form of money to facilitate trade in exchange for goods and services produced by others, with the one exception that a single individual has a superpower to print money requiring no investment of time and at practically no cost. Given human time is an inherently scarce resource and that it is a required input in the production of any good or service demanded in trade, such a scenario would mean that one person would get to purchase the output of all the others for free. Why would anyone agree to such an arrangement? That the individual is an enterprise and more specifically a central bank expected to act in the public interest does not change the fundamental operation. If it does not make sense on a micro level, it does not magically transform into a different fundamental fact merely because there are greater degrees of separation. If no individual would bestow that power in another, neither would a conscious decision be made to bestow it in a central bank. I think it's a human psychology dilemma that there's a concept of Dunbar number that most of us, most humans, are not able to form meaningful connections beyond a certain number, which Dunbar number is 150, and it could be four people to somebody, it could be 500 to somebody, but it's never the scale of the economy that most humans are currently living in. So the economy itself or money becomes so abstracted away for people that it becomes difficult for them to even wrap their head around, which goes into the idea of creating microeconomics and macroeconomics. And people think they tend to work in very different ways, and they don't, because macroeconomics is just state level actors doing their own economic activity, no different than any other human organization, any other company, any other individual, which is always trying to maximize value, which whatever value means to them. So this is the foundational broken system that Keynesian economics advocates for, that you have to study microeconomics and macroeconomics separately. I was having a conversation with somebody and he was trying to explain to me that on a macro level, counterintuitive things start to happen, almost as if macroeconomics is quantum mechanics and you have to look at it a different way. And he was trying to justify how an asset which does not have inflation will over time create an economy where nobody wants to work. There's a weird arguments about how hard money creates a society of less less work, which I don't even want to entertain because becomes a headache for me. But yeah, if somebody is wanting to break down the entire Keynesian model with a Keynesian, I think it's a good push up for somebody as a mental exercise. Yeah, just one pause. I'll begin in a few seconds. We're at the halfway mark.
Yeah, I think the argument is not what deflationary currency leads to. Is that can you beat a deflationary currency? Like if I know I store my asset in Bitcoin and I'll always become
If
richer.
you can just move a little closer. Your voice is audible, but could be better.
Yeah, what I'm saying is more than the argument being that a deflationary currency will not work because people will not work under deflationary currency. I think a more stronger argument will be given a choice. Like if there's really a choice and the government does not enforce me to exchange my assets or exchange my services with an inflationary currency, why will people not store their assets and their services in exchange of deflationary currency? Because like that currency will always become more expensive, will be always worth more assets, more services. So why will people not do that? So I think again it's a very government or very organizational way of looking at things. and imagining that the world is being run by WEF or the world is being run by United Nations. No, that's not how the world works. People create these institutions when it serves them, and when there's an alternate model available, people will choose that. And so, as long as for an individual it makes sense that they will move from USD to or INR to Bitcoin, uh, everything else will be taken care, because eventually all these other constructs are made up by like people's individuals incentive, is what my take on that is.
Right. Yeah, I think I recently started exploring. Sachin shared this on the Bitcoin group on WhatsApp. There are some economists in India, Amit Verma, Shruti Rajgopalan, Ajay Shah, who understand the problems of central planning, but they are still Keynesian because they advocate for they take inflation to be for granted. That's the assumption that Keynesian economics just makes. It's like a force of gravity we just have to deal with. So there is some fundamental block that I think we have to ascribe on a very individual, responsible level that I have not had the chance to have a conversation with the Keynesian economics who understands problems of central planning as well. If they are coming from a disingenuous place that they are just shilling their own framework for their own reasons, that's a different thing because you can't uh, wake up a person who's pretending to sleep. But yeah, I think if somebody has checked out, or I would recommend to check out Ajay Shah and Shruti Rajgopal. I've recently started exploring their work. They're actually very critical of central planning. They're critical of socialism. They're critical of Nehru's policies. They quote Hayek. They quote, I think, Rothbard. But for some reason, they're not questioning the central bank. They're not questioning inflation itself, which to me was just too disconcerting. I was fine. It's my personal responsibility to work on that, to be more emotionally intelligent, to not get worked up when somebody makes those arguments. But yeah, I see it as a very, my personal opinion, it's a lack of personal responsibility to not question that. Humans can question the basic fundamental blocks of reality itself. I'm sure somebody should be able to question the building block of inflation. So yeah,
I think then the question is like, uh, for a lot of people, like, how does it matter, right? So I think there was this conversation that I had like long time back with a friend of mine, and I was like, I really don't understand if there's a God, or if God exists. I'm atheist, or I'm agnostic, or like what. And he was like, how does that matter? And unless like people's life, uh, like it does not really matter to them, uh, I think a lot of people will question, but then they will not look for the answers. So it's a little like that. So they will question it because they feel there's something off with central planning, or they feel there's something off with this. But like help them buy Bitcoin, and the moment they probably will buy 0.001 Bitcoin and see the prices shooting, they will become a Bitcoiner.
yeah, that's a good. I mean, yeah, that's a good way to orange pill, just to help them get some sats and let Bitcoin do its magic. Yep, yep. Yeah. If no one has anything else to share, please always feel free. In case you do, I'll continue reading. Everything beyond this fundamental reality strays into abstract theory, relying on leaps of faith, hypotheticals, and big words that no one understands, all while divorced from individual decision points. It is not that one individual is more trusted than another or one central bank relative to another. It is simply that on an individual level, no individual is advantaged by someone else having the ability to print money, regardless of identity or interests. That this is true leaves only one alternative, that each individual would be advantaged by ensuring that no other individual or entity has this power. The Fed may have the ability to create dollars at zero cost, but money still doesn't grow on trees. It is more likely that a particular form of money is not actually money than it is that money miraculously started growing on trees. And at an individual level, everyone is incentivized to ensure that this is not the case. While there is a long habit of not thinking this particular thing wrong, the errant defense of custom can only stray so far. Hmm. I think it's the idea of liberty. Most people, just my opinion, that some people are actually wanting someone else to tell them how to live and share resources with them, and yeah, tell them what value is. So they inherently subscribe to the model of a central institution creating resources, creating central planning. But yeah, if somebody values that, understands that value is subjective, and inherent trust in someone else's value system makes you vulnerable to exploitation by their value system, it doesn't take much seconds to know that printing money is the stupidest thing to happen. Time converts everyone back into reality. At present, it is Fed's shock and awe campaign contrasted by the simplicity in Bitcoin's fixed supply of 21 million. There is no amount of reason that can replace an observed divergence in two distinct paths. It's also I think, very historically or just the reality of how humans evolve. It's just the matter of change being difficult. So it's not A or B's fault. It's just the nature of change that it's difficult for a lot of people to get onboarded to the new system. Just for plain inertia reasons. It's not even that they are bad people or lazy or not intelligent. It's just my opinion that they are slow in adopting to change. Defending existing custom, there's money and there's credit. The only thing that matters is spending, and you can spend money and you can spend credit. And when credit goes down, you better put money into the system so you can have the same level of spending. That's what they did through the financial system, referencing QE in response to the past crisis, and that thing worked. This is from Ray Dalio, it's DNBC, September 2019, 2017. Basic Bitcoin common sense. Yep, the entire value flows from this simple fact: there will only ever be 21 million. And understanding that comes from the understanding of economic principles, which is that there is no free lunch. As more people become aware of Fed's activities, it only begins to raise more questions. 2.5 trillion is a big number, but what is actually happening? Who gets the money? What will the effect be and when? What are the consequences? Why is this even possible? How does it make any sense? All very valid questions, but none of these questions change the fact that many more dollars exist and that each dollar will be worth materially less in the future. That is intuitive. However, at an even more fundamental level, recognize that the operation of printing money or creating digital dollars does nothing to generate economic activity. To really simplify it, imagine a printing press just running on a loop, or imagine keying in an amount of dollars on a computer, which is technically all that Fed does when it creates money. That very operation can definitionally do nothing to produce anything of value in the real world. Instead, that action can only induce an individual to take some other action. Yeah, and so Hayek puts this profoundly, but in a very simple layman terms, what the act of printing money does is not create nothing of value, but it does create distortion because it does create price signals in the economy because fiat currencies are monetized and people are forced to act because that's the common medium of exchange, that's the value language that society currently operates on. And what that does is that action, that individual is forced to act on that price signal and take some other action which otherwise the free market or his own voluntary volition wouldn't have allowed him, or would have allowed him to do separate things. So it creates this complete distortion of human value and human behavior. Recognize that any tangible good or service produced is produced by some individual. Human time is the input, capital production is the output, whether it is software applications, manufacturing equipment, a service, or an end consumer good. All along the value chain, an individual contributed time to produce some good or service. That time and value is ultimately what money tracks and prices. Entering a large number into the computer does not produce software, hardware, cars, or homes. People produce those things, and money coordinates the preferences of all individuals within an economy, compensating value to varying degrees for time spent. I think the closest to magic that, again, just my opinion territory. I've been sharing a lot of opinions, so my apologies if it deviates from the article. But yeah, the closest to magic that there is to reality is value itself. because it's subjective, it's intrinsic to how you decide value to be. So any distortion in value, whenever there's misinformation in money, there is a distortion of value because you are forced to act in ways which you wouldn't have otherwise done. So it's that distortion of magic that you were in control of until that distortion. So it's just my rambling on why the whole reality of how any human is able to view the world is completely out of whack because of problems of the monetary system. When the Fed creates 2.5 trillion in a matter of weeks, it is consolidating the power to price and value human time. Seems cryptic, but it is not. A suggestion that the individuals at the Fed are consciously or deliberately operating maliciously. It is just the root level consequence of the Fed's actions, even if well intentioned. Again, the Fed's operation, arbitrarily adding zeros to various bank account balances, cannot actually generate economic activity. All it can do is determine how to allocate new dollars. By doing so, it is advantaging some individual enterprise or segment of the economy over another. In allocating new dollars that it creates, it is replacing a market function, one prized by billions of people, with a centralized function, greatly influencing the balance of power as to who controls the monetary capital that coordinates economic activity. Think about the distribution of money as the balance of control, influencing and ultimately determining what gets built, by whom, and at what price. At the moment of creation, there exists more money, but there exists no more human time or goods and services as a consequence of that action. Similarly, over time, the Fed's actions do not create more jobs. There are just more dollars to distribute across the labor force, but with a different distribution of those holding the currency. The Fed can print money, technically create digital dollars, but it can't print more time, nor can it do anything but artificially manipulate the allocation of resources within an economy. No free lunches, just more dollars. I was actually not able to understand this graph entirely, but yeah, the labor force, if somebody does have some understanding, please do share it. So this is from the US labor force and Fed balance sheet, which is indexed to 100. 2007 is 100. And yeah, the labor market shoot off. Yeah, I'm almost completely clueless in understanding this. We'll move on. I'll take one short pause and then we'll start. Hey Bala, thanks for joining.
I think
Hey,
hey Bala, the graph is basically saying that there's not much increase in human labor force or productivity in a way, but
Yeah.
but the balance sheet has bloated. So to say that additional money is bringing in unlocking new productivity, that might not be true. Yeah,
Yeah.
it might just be corrupting some and like enhancing some kind of productive work because there's more dollars available. Like government might be tampering with the value uh, that stands for certain kind of productive work.
Right. Yep.
And the allocation of resources is the thumb rule that it only changes the allocation of resources. It does not change the resources themselves. It's just a printing press running. It's just a wastage of whatever paper or digital paper gets created. But it has real effects on the economy because it distorts the allocation of resources, which would have gone otherwise to different sectors, different individuals, and different knowledge distribution. But it distorts that whole free market value system. Since 2007,
Also, the
Mhm.
effectiveness of the capital is a function of the labor force. There have been many cases where IMF descended on many countries and then they have tried to pump money, but still, if the labor force is not shifted, then you can't, your capital can't be productive.
Yep.
The manifestation of the same is like what happened during COVID when countries went on a spree of printing money and the stock market went sky high, and because there was a lot of cheap capital available, it was allotted to a lot of businesses that weren't robust enough. Like a lot of companies that did not have a good business model. A lot of money was pumped into it, and their stocks skyrocketed. And after that, when the brakes were applied, almost 99% of those companies like landed on their nose. So there were so many penny stocks, right, that gave people 10x, 20x, even 30x during COVID because there was so much capital to allocate. And later on, when the brakes were applied, like all of those companies, their shares came crashing down. So that is also a manifestation of what Bala said, that you don't only need capital available; that capital needs to be allocated appropriately. If you allocate your capital at places where it will not reap the right benefits, then the capital will go in vain.
Yeah, during COVID, like in US, there were many programs like the federal government was giving money. Like the federal government was giving money to companies just to hold people in their jobs, not to fire them and just to keep them on the rolls. Companies were getting money.
Yeah, I think that's also one of the official mandates of the central bank is to ensure something called full employment in the economy, which just fundamentally is absurd. But yeah, thank you for bringing up those points. And I was curious to pick Bala's mind because on the recent Japan carry trade unwinding, I have very superficial understanding based on some podcasts I watch. But I know that you have mentioned Japan's economy before as well. So yeah, just curious to take your point. Maybe we can do this after the session or yeah, whenever we want
Yeah,
to
yeah.
open the discussion. Yep,
Uh,
yep.
ba- Basically, like the recent trigger was the Japan's Bank of Japan increasing its interest rates. So they usually got out of zero bound and they hiked from 0 to 0.25%, and that sort of freaked everyone out, and the carry trade started to reverse. So there was a huge blow up, and now Bank of Japan has sort of mellowed down their tone, and they have promised that they won't hike anymore. It's sort of like they're accepting that they're trapped now, and they're scratching their head as to what to do now.
Sorry, can you repeat the last point? They are trapped and
Yeah, they thought that they could like because they have some sort of an inflation now going in Japan, and their stock market actually reaching 30-year means their last their Nikkei's last highest was in 1990, I think, and after that now for the first time after like 30 years it has reached the 1990 highs. So BOJ thought that okay, now things seems to have normalized, and we shall sort of increase the interest rates. So that was their plan, but it seems to have backfired, and now they can't they don't have much room, and even if inflation in Japan picks up from here, accelerates, they can't raise rates anymore.
right. Yeah, I think I remember understanding reading of how when interest rates are increased for a certain currency, it makes it less desirable compared to other currencies. Is that the case? Uh, but yeah, I'll probably have
Yeah,
to.
okay, maybe basically the carry trade is that because interest rates are very cheap in Japan, the carry trader goes to Japan, uh, borrows money in Japanese yen. The interest rate is zero there, so he doesn't have to pay anything for that. So he just borrows it, and usually because interest rates are very low, the borrower can leverage it. Typically, there is some. Typically, these N carry traders leverage it like 20x, 30x, something like that. and then they take that money and then convert it into whatever currency they want, maybe USD, maybe Australian dollar, and then go to Australia or US, invest that money in some assets, which will yield them reasonable return, 3, 4, 5%, and they'll pocket it, and then they keep rolling this trade. The basic assumption was that Japan will not increase the rates, and uh, they will sort of hold the rates near 0%. So that was the assumption behind this carry trade. So now that suddenly Japanese central bank has started to increase the interest rates, everyone now is sort of scared. Like the main problem is the leverage. Even if you do a carry trade and if you have not done it on leverage, you will still be able to pocket a decent return because the spread between 0.25% and 4 or 5% is still profitable enough. But the problem is when it comes to the problem comes when it, problem is leverage. So when interest rate starts to spike because they have leveraged, uh, the banks at which they have taken the leverage will start to ask the traders to cover their position with more assets. So one of the reasons that Bitcoin also dropped because of this carry trade unwinding is because Bitcoin is liquid, and most of these traders also hold Bitcoin as an asset. They can easily sell Bitcoin and cover their leverages. So that is one of the reasons why Bitcoin was the first asset to sort of start going down, and then everything else followed. So yeah, now because Bank of Japan has said that they don't plan any more hikes, and they have sort of calmed the market a little bit. Things have started to go back. So we don't know how it will proceed, and if inflation sort of picks up again in Japan and then goes above, Japan will have no other option but to again hike their interest rate, and this sort of event will likely happen again.
Right. Wow. Thank you so much, Bala, for elaborating it. So, yeah, I had a very superficial understanding, but yeah, you made it very clear. Yeah, and I think the problem arises from this over leveraged Japanese currency assets, right? That people are using Japanese currencies and leveraged that to way beyond what is sustainable to use it to buy assets. Is that correct?
Yeah. Basically, if you borrow 100 yen and then convert it and then buy assets, it's not going to be a problem. The problem comes when you back that. For example, the 100 yen that you are going to borrow, you will have to put some collateral to back that loan. Uh, Typically, if because of leverage, the underlying collateral that is required to cover that loan will be very less. So for every 100 yen, maybe you will provide 10 yen worth of collateral. The assumption is that because the Japanese bank won't hike the rates, and the Japanese JPY versus dollar will sort of remain flattish, or it will be inside some sort of a trend, is the assumption behind these sort of high leverages. So if any of these two assumptions start to fail, then the lender will ask you for more collateral to cover. So at that time, if there is a high, people will try sort of sell the most liquid assets that they have, and then try to cover the collateral. So that's why the first thing in any liquidity event like this to sell off will be Bitcoin. So they try to sell the most liquid assets that they have, and that trades 24/7. So the timing also matters. The trader might be in Japan or he might be in any other country. If the lender is in Japan and he requests collateral in Japanese time, and if his market is not open, then will be forced to sell whatever he can in whichever market he can. So that's what happens typically.
Right. Nice. Yeah, that almost proves the utility of Bitcoin, right? Even though it dipped the purchasing power of people who are holding Bitcoin, but it showed the utility of Bitcoin's liquidity in the market.
Yeah, there is argument that if you look at it in the long time frame, it sort of acts like a store of value, but in the short time frame, it is the most liquid and liquid asset that can be sold, and because it trades all over the world 24 by 7.
Mm. Yep. Thanks again, Bala, for giving the elaborate explanation. We are approaching 9. What I'll do is I'll take 5 minutes of you guys time more. We'll read up till here. I won't. I don't think we can cover the entire article. Yeah. Since 2007, the Fed balance sheet has increased sevenfold, but the labor force has only increased 6%. There are roughly the same number of people contributing output, human time, but far more dollars to compensate for that time. Do not be confused by impossible to quantify theory concerning the idea of a job saved versus a job lost. This is the US labor force defined by the Bureau of Labor Statistics as all persons 16 years of age and older, both employed and unemployed. The inevitable result is that the value of each dollar declines, but it does not create more workers, and all prices do not adjust ratably to the increase in the money supply, including the price of labor. Yep. Yeah, I'm sure you guys are aware that the prices change due to the expansion of the money supply is not in proportion to the goods and service and the labor in the market, because somebody first receives the new capital that is able to have a higher negotiation power or purchasing power over goods and service in the economy, and they can bid other competitors higher very easily because they have access to cheap credit or the new money in supply, and it trickles down money in that, which is what is called a Cantillon effect. In a theoretical world, if the Fed were to distribute the money in equal proportion to each individual that held the currency previously, it would not shift the balance of power. In practical application, the distribution of ownership shifts dramatically, heavily favoring the holders of financial assets, which is what the Fed buys in the process of creating new dollars, as well as those with cheap access to credit, the government, large corporations, high net worth individuals, etc. In aggregate, the purchasing power of every dollar declines, just not immediately, while a small subset benefits as the cost of the whole. I think Fed is the biggest buyer of assets just because it's the mechanism that it uses to create new dollars, and yeah, it's a direct abuse of the power that they have, and yeah, goes back to that analogy of just 100 people in a small economy. One person having the power to print money just gives them that advantage to use the output of other people's labor and time, which holds true even at the global financial system level. Despite the consequences, the Fed takes actions in an attempt to support a credit system that would otherwise collapse without the supply of more dollars. In the Fed's economy, the credit system is the price setting mechanism, as the amount of dollar denominated debt far outstrips the supply of dollars, which is also why the purchasing power of each dollar does not immediately respond to the increase in the money supply. Yeah, I'll just walk over this graph once. So the total money supply increased 2.5 trillion, and how it happens by the Federal Reserve is that they buy U.S. Treasuries, which is the majority of the new money into supply. Yeah, and this is the financial asset that is the biggest store of value in the world, the most safe store of value because of the interest rate that the U.S. government can provide, and that is the majority of the assets that are used as store of value in the economy, and that is the Fed purchasing them just through creation of new money. There is central bank swaps. I did just one quick research on it, but I'm not sure if I can cover what exactly central bank swaps are. But on a very superficial level, it is central banks swapping currencies with other central banks and using that to provide liquidity for each other, which was most dramatically used during the financial crisis when there was a demand for US dollars because of the impact of the markets failing in the US. A lot of markets globally also failed, and they needed US dollars to stimulate the economy, which was created through central bank swaps. There is mortgage-backed securities, direct loans issuance, and other. And yeah, this is the fiat currency ceiling problem that there's only 4.5 trillion dollars in existence, 2.4 of which were created during the 2020 2.5 trillion money supply increase, and the debt in the total economy is 75.5 trillion at the time, out of which the US debt that the individuals hold, corporations, and people outside of the government hold is 56.4 trillion, and the federal government debt, which is the US government, is 19.1 trillion, which is expanding massively by more creation of US treasuries and government bonds. And while other people are forced to pay off their debt because they don't have access to free printing money. And each dollar still levered 17:1 despite increase in the system dollars of 2.4 trillion. So even though there was an expansion of 2.5 trillion, which is almost 60%, I believe, as this article says, in the total money supply, and it was still only 17:1 of the debt that is in the existing economy in 2020. I'm not sure of the current numbers, but yeah, it's worse than the system in 2020. And just one point on why it is 2.4 trillion and not 2.5 is that difference of 100 billion relative to 2.5 trillion dollars created reflects net physical currency withdrawals which have left the banking system. And system dollars, defined as dollars in the banking system, dollars held by the treasury, and dollars held by foreign institutions, excludes physical currency in circulation, as these are dollars that exist outside the banking system and are generally not available to satisfy banking system liabilities, dollar denominated debt. Yeah, so this is physical currency which is being used by individuals and cannot be used by the banking system to create more fractional reserve or to use their to satisfy their liabilities. Yeah, I think I'll just take the pause here. We've reached 9:05. We'll continue next week.